So, good morning, everybody. His Excellency, the Vice Mayor of Kraków, dear colleagues, it's a real distinct honor for me to be with you today and to share our experience in this field, which definitely needs us to do something to minimize the risk to our children and to our generation. Okay. So, I am the president of this Cyprus National Committee on Children's Environment and Health. We are a multidisciplinary scientific committee. We are appointed by the government, but we are not paid. We are volunteers. The government, Ministry of Health, support and finance all our activities, like the videos, the leaflets, the conferences, etc. Our main task is to provide scientific support and advice to the Minister of Health, other ministers, to the Parliament, and regulators and decision makers. We don't have any executive power, though. So we aim to raise awareness, to minimize exposure to many environmental toxic factors. EMF is one of them, but we did a lot of work also in the field of environmental tobacco smoking, of mercury, and many other issues. And we try to educate the people, and more importantly, to train the professionals, and to ensure that we might have a prompt response to emerging threats and not fully established but well-documented risks via the application of precautionary principle. This is the foundation of our mission. Why such a committee is needed? Because I think all experience that risk assessment and risk management practices and legislation in many cases fails or take very delayed actions to protect the health, in particular of infants and children. Why? Because uncertainties, scientific ignorances, controversies, and on top of them, big economic interest. Examples: mercury, asbestos, environmental tobacco smoking, and now is the new. So I had a long experience participating in the risk assessment committees of European Commission. And I tried to find out what are the existing difficulties in risk assessment in this particular field. And I summarize some of the factors which are contributing to gaps, uncertainties, conflicting studies, and might lead to biological inconsistency among studies, which is a problem of today. So we have to keep in mind that the effects are multifactorial. They depend on exposure, on frequency, on the modulation, on vulnerability of the subject. Therefore, we have many studies which varied in terms of physical and biological parameters that they are using in their design. Exposure is increasingly and highly variable in terms of frequency, duration, and sources. And windows of intensity exist in that case, exactly as is the case with endocrine disruptor chemicals, which creates a lot of problem to identify several safe levels, as you know. And we have a wide passive exposure, which makes quite difficult in our century to identify totally unexposed blank population in order to do our studies. Long-term effects have not yet fully uploaded, and in many cases fall out of the time frame of many studies, so we miss the end point. And adequate children-oriented studies are missing in our days, and as we see later on, is not appropriate just to extrapolate from adults to children. I'm not going to tell you about the impacts in general, because this will be done by my friend Dr. Badara later, but I just like to highlight to you where we stand today in terms of evidence. So this is a review made by Lyon in 2019, and it shows that for neurological, neuropsychiatric impacts, 72 of the studies show effect. And in relation to impact on DNA via oxidative mechanisms, the figure is much higher, is 90%. And of course, we have the issue of of carcinogenicity, which the puzzle here tends to be closed, but not yet closed completely. Started in 2011 from WHO recognition that, from EARC recognition that is a possible carcinogen, but now we have the 2 animal studies from NTP and Ramazzini Institute. We have more epidemiological studies, and there is urgent need for re-evaluation of this carcinogenicity potential. And our focus is fetus, infants, and children. Why? Because they are the most exposed and the most vulnerable. And we see why this is happening. So, first of all, we have, I have to say that WHO so far is a little bit hesitate to put a clear position on the issue, unfortunately, or is very delayed. But these are facts admitted by them. In 2005, they admit the fetus and child have unique windows of vulnerability not found in adults. In 2011, we have, under the EARC monograph, stated very clearly that the exposure for a 3-year-old child compared to an adult is up to twice in brain and up to 10 times in marrow bone in the brain. And the last one is on 2014, WHO report claims that we don't know yet all the effects of this radiation, but the impact on fetuses and children might be higher. And this is a very good reference, is the article by Rice and Barone on the critical periods of vulnerability for the children. They say that early exposure can initiate a cascade of alterations which may not be detected structurally or functionally, but much later in life. And the effects may be manifested as persistent or transit deficit or simple delays in the development. And this brings to the famous article from WHO in 2011, where it speaks about the plasticity during development. This plasticity, which is developed when the children are put under environmental stress, exposed to toxic factors, they develop this plasticity, which in the next year will change how the fetus, the embryo as an adult, can react and respond to environmental challenges, and this could be a risk factor for non-communicable diseases. And linked to that is a publication from the neuroscience where they speak very clearly that this neuroplasticity can support the evidence that there is a link between this neuroplasticity and the neurodegenerative processes later, like Alzheimer and Parkinson's disease. Some effects which are extremely important for children, going from the long-term effects, the disabilities, of course, first of all is children's brain, the neurological development. We have the cancer, reproductive disorders, immune dysfunction, but also addiction, cognition problem, sleep and behavior, which we experience already in the children. And very important is that this radiation can affect the already weak defense mechanism of the child's body. Primarily reduction of melatonin, which is one of the free radical scavengers, and destruction of myelin. If we destruct myelin, the neurological development of the children goes inevitably wrong. And there are also short-term effects which we experience, like sleeping disorders, insomnia, baby crying in the night, maybe it's a baby monitor next to his bed, attention deficit, learning difficulties, unexplained changes in the school performances of the children. All these should not escape our attention. We have to be careful to see if there are wireless devices in the home, remove them. And of course, you have to consult your doctor definitely. And why children are more susceptible? I think everybody knows from the chemicals about immature defense mechanisms, about their development. But one factor which is very relevant to this radiation is the higher densities of embryonic stem which are found in children and which are particularly affected by EMF and difficult to adapt to chronic exposure to EMF. And we have also higher sensitivity in children in relation to epigenetic changes in DNA caused by this, which can change child's development and neurological one. All the references are provided on the slide. If now we consider that we have faster cell division in conjunction with decreased DNA repair and decreased DNA damage, this shows us that the children might be increasingly susceptible to cancer and to disruption of the brain. And come to the exposure, which is nowadays is extremely high. And the children are going to have many years of cumulative exposure. So the exposure till 1990, when the first limits were set, with what we experience today, they have nothing in common. Today is a multiple, is indeterminate, is additive. It happens and starts in all vulnerable stages of the development for fetus up to adolescence. And child, according to recent publication by Fernandez in Brazil, absorbs about twice as much radiation to cerebellum and up to 30-fold more into hippocampus. All these are very alarming, I think, and bring us to the issue of internal exposure. They have internal exposure, and this is very well documented in literature, especially by this Lloyd Morgan article, which says that the radiation goes deeper because, and is higher because they have smaller and thinner skull, higher dielectric constants, and greater conductivity than the adult. And here is a picture which speaks of its own, I think. It shows the radiation, which starts from the yellow, is the more intensive one, goes to white. How much is absorbed and is deeper in child, 5 years old, compared to adult. This was known since 1996, but it didn't appear very to a wide public unless until 2011 in this year monograph of carcinogenicity. And here is again from Fernandez a simulation of how the radiation is absorbed in the face and the head, and all the head and the neck of the child. The red one is the more intensive, the more strong radiation, but yellow is still of concern. And again here you see another picture how the radiation is distributed in the head of a boy who is sitting in front of wireless device. And here is you see the greatest exposure for the fetus, which is totally unprotected from the radiation, if the mom is using wireless devices. And we see that the maximum exposure occurs to the fetal head and to spinal cord. And Thornton explains very well what this exposure could mean for a fetus. This exposure can modulate the nervous system. This temporal disruption in fetus and infants might act to severely delay or disrupt vital initial calibration of the brain network, such as the mirror neuron system. And some other effects from the literature, based on stroke evidence, RF can possibly increase the active risk and symptoms. We are not sure yet if it can cause it, but we are sure that it can increase it. Wireless devices used by pregnant women may alter brain development. This has been linked to hyperactivity, learning and behavioral problems, and we see some examples later on. A very good reference to see all the effects on fetus is under the Joint Statement on Pregnancy and Wireless Radiation 2014. They make a record from animal studies, what are the effects on fetuses, and also from epidemiological studies, where it's clearly shown that prenatally and postnatally exposure could have effects on the behavior of the children. And I jump to the very famous, I think, Divan study, Divan and other study, where they found that the usage of mobile phone 2 or 3 times a day by a pregnant woman can increase the risk when the children reach the age of 7, and evaluated of this, the risk was 54% to have behavior, social, and sentimental problem by that age. And this was a cohort with 13,000 children. The risk can go up to 80% if these children postnatally continue to expose. And to confirm this, they make another study, the same group, 2 years later, with a totally different new data set, consisted of 29,000 children, and the only thing they consider additional confounder factors, etc., because they themselves, they didn't believe that the first study could be a real one. So they want to confirm it. And the result is that they have simply confirmation of this. And we have another study later, very recently in 2017, a multinational 5 cohort study, where they, again, they come to the same, more or less, conclusion. And now I go to the mythos of Wi-Fi. Mythos in Greece is something that it's been said, but is not true. They said and they claim that because Wi-Fi has a low energy, it's safe. This is not true. So the truth is that Wi-Fi have very strong pulses and peaks because it transfers information continuously, and these are of very high intensity and very bioactive. The second issue here is exposure duration, which can be 24 hours uninterrupted exposure, and this is very high. And we have now a review of literature where it shows that Wi-Fi depletes antioxidants and creates pro-oxidant oxidative stress, which damage DNA, cell structure, and cell membranes. And we have a very nice review coming from Germany with 100 studies, which reveals all kinds of impacts from the Wi-Fi exposure. And when we consider Wi-Fi in school, this picture comes from Australia, we are going to have a massive passive exposure. We might have 20 students, 20 computers or more. So there is a passive exposure from all these computers, from the routers of Wi-Fi, and we have also the active exposure, which comes from the individual's activity on his own computer. That's why from 2011 already, Council of Europe warns against the installation of Wi-Fi in school. Many scientific organizations followed us. We have most recently the Kraków appeal in 2017, and we have the Nicosia Declaration, our declaration, which I'm going to elaborate a bit, showing that Wi-Fi should not be the issue for schools. The first country who implement legislation is France. Recently, France put a very strong law where prohibits all wireless devices in schools up to 15 years old students. In Cyprus, we have a rather soft decree from the Ministry of Education, at least prohibiting Wi-Fi at kindergartens and public elementary schools. But it's not only this. What is happening from the invasion of this digital technology in the life of our children? With all these application engagements who have never been tested, what can cause to these children. This is a very difficult problem. You see here this picture, I go to the next slide. You see here a child sitting on a porch with iPad. This is criminal, to my opinion. It's criminal, I repeat it. And you may choose the next picture, which is for my grandson, which is trained on a simple pod, having a book, listening a story from me, so developing in the same time his brain. This is the choice, it's not the iPods. And bring us to the issue of addiction. I mean, nobody can deny today that the children are addicted to this technology, and this has been declared by WHO very recently. So we have one coin with two sides. The one side is radiation, and the other side is the use of this technology, the irrational use of this technology. So there is no way that we have to reduce the exposure and to promote rational age-related usage. We are not against the technology. We said this has to be age-related, according to the scientific evidence. Now, coming to Cyprus, how we are addressing the risk, how we try to put in practice some measures. First of all, we have campaigns since 2014, aiming to awareness raise to reduce exposure and protect children. And this has three main pillars. One is at the policy level, which is very important. The second one is primarily focused on schools and houses. And the third one, which is equally important, is focusing on doctors. Doctors, by the way, are members in our committee. We have 3 members in our committee, so they participate. So we try to cooperate with them and to provide education on this issue. And going first to the policy level, we try to open dialogue with the Ministry of Education, Health, the Parliament, and the Environment Commissioner, which is also a member in our committee, fortunately. So, the 3 outcomes we have so far, first was the decree by the Ministry of Education for the Wi-Fi's and in relation to kindergartens and elementary schools. Second is the Nicosia Declaration, which actually is a unique example of cooperation of our committee with the Medical Association, the Doctors of Cyprus, and beyond, with the Doctors of Austria. So the declaration is a common declaration with the 2 medical associations, Cyprus, Austria, and our committee. And the third one is the common position on 5G. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that. So, focusing to doctor again, as I said, is the Nicosia Declaration. We co-organize conferences with them, and we have a project to minimize Wi-Fi in intensive care units of pediatric hospital with them. I'm going to show you, but we consider doctor is a key issue, because if they are well educated, they are the only one who can persuade the parents, can influence them and empower them to use better practices for their children. And of course, we do also a lot of training with them. Every year we participate most of the times in their conferences, and we raise this issue. The key recommendations of the Nicosia Declaration, which you can find in our website in English as well, is that the limits need to be revised, but we don't have to wait for this revision. We have to implement for now specific biological relevant criteria to evaluate children's exposure. We don't have to wait. It takes too long. Maybe we don't succeed to come to revision of the limits. And we call for age-related rational application of digital technology. We ask not to allow wireless networks at schools. At home and schools, the use of wireless devices has to be to minimize, if not, they have to use wired internet, they have to reduce the use of mobile phones, etc. And coming to the position on 5G, this picture, I like it very much. I got it from the internet. I don't know who is designing it, but it's from Raymond Blumen's side. It speaks of its own, what is 5G. And then we go to... nowadays in Cyprus there is a discussion on 5G in our parliament. Actually started last Thursday and will continue next Thursday. So we decided as a committee to formulate a common position with the Doctors Association. So we are much more stronger in our position. So we sit together and we formulate this. I just highlight the main issues. We express serious concern for additional exposure and health impact. We urge for appropriate health and environmental impact assessment prior to deployment. And we recommend for legislative compensatory measure for the protection of vulnerable population, especially fetus and children. More specifically, we ask the Parliament to put legislation where we ban the use of all wireless devices in schools up to the age of 15, following the France example, to establish free from 5G zones, protective zones for schools, playgrounds, nurseries and hospitals, and to use biological safe criteria complementary to the existing law. And to support the right to know for the people. It's very important that people are not well informed. Therefore, we believe that it should be a wide range campaign financed by the government, but the responsibility of the content should rely on medical doctors and our committee. We will not allow other things to intervene in this and make it less clear. So this is our project, which is first in the world, trying to minimize the exposure of children in hospitals, particularly in the intensive care of the main pediatric hospital, Archiepiscopos Makarios. Thanks to the enthusiastic director of this hospital, Dr. Neophytou, and his team, they decided to work with us and to make a first effort in the intensive unit, and then if we manage to go further. I will show a few slides. This is something which were exposed in the hospital, but with a lot of other material would make the people more sensitive to understand why we deactivate Wi-Fi in these units. And here is what we measure actually. We did this with the help of Dr. Metsis. We wrote together the report, thank you to him. So we measure that the Wi-Fi cause a passive exposure up to 10 meters distance from the router. And this was up to 20,000 microwatts per square meter. And of course, it causes also active exposure when downloading a video. And we have a lot of examples, parents sitting next to their children with an iPad downloading videos for them. So this is the things we wanted to avoid. So after the disconnection, we disconnect the Wi-Fi and we provide wire internet. We didn't restrict the internet. So we find that the levels fall dramatically down within acceptable biological criteria below 59 microwatts per square meter. And this is very good considering that in the other places of the hospital there's still Wi-Fi. Yeah? So, but we are still struggling with the nurses to persuade them not to hold their mobiles in their pockets, not to connect all the time with the internet. They are quite resistant in that. They didn't want us to remove the Wi-Fi because of this, but I hope that by the time we might come to a better situation. And what we learn from this experience that wirenet internet should be the only option for children's hospitals. The pilot campaign indicates very clearly the problem of ignorance within the staff and parents. We did a lot of work to educate the parents, to make them to understand. Because all they feel that there is no risk, and they don't have a knowledge of good practices, how they can use the internet and how they can make what they like. So we decided and we suggested in our report that no new antennas, either from 3 or 4G or 5G antennas, should be installed close to the hospital, because at present the situation is very good. So we propose a free from 5G zone around this. We aim now to go to the second phase to implement this in the cancer unit of the hospital and subsequently to other units. We have also implemented this in the school of the hospital, because they are chronically children suffering from chronic diseases. They are hospitalized and they are following the school there. So the school now is Wi-Fi free. This was what we achieved in Makarios Hospital. And go now to the houses and school. The awareness reigns for parents and children. One thing I would like to raise to you is that we need to understand that at least we need free zones in terms of time and space for our children. I mean, for instance, the time that we are dining in the home should be devices, wireless devices free. Nobody is using his mobile phone, no, everything switched out for a few hours, at least. And why we focus very much on home? We calculated that depending on the age of the child, 60 to 90% of their time they spend in school and home. So if we manage for this part of their life to have a more safe environment, is something, is very important. I say, I got the argument that Wi-Fi is everywhere. Yeah, but it's different to be in your house. It's different to be close to your child. So just create some good environment for the children. But I have to say that the parents are not an easy task. They are addicted to themselves. They enjoy the convenience of this. And here is where we think the role of doctors is very important to change their minds. And we use videos and we use leaflets like the ones is here. In our website you can find this, you can download, it's free. And yeah. So our aim is to make first the people to understand and then to give them the tools how to implement good practices. And here is the empowerment of children. We believe very much to empower the children because this can be the ambassador of our campaign. Here you see what my granddaughter Stella Lina, 7 years old in Vienna, creates for me. She has a Wi-Fi, no Wi-Fi, there is happy birds and happy humans. Stella Lina knows already very well about the risk. She knows that he has the right for health, and she's demanding this from his father in particular. She knows that she has to keep distance from her parents when they are making calls, and she knows that he can use my phone only when it is on flight mode. So here is another picture from my other granddaughter, Serafina, the same age in Cyprus. He created for me a leaflet. She saw my leaflet and she said, yeah, I'm preparing one for you. And simply he says, don't irradiate me. And next to it, bravo. Bravo means I'm glad to do this. So we believe, we have the experience from environmental tobacco smoking, that the children can influence their parents more than we can do. And here is the launching of our last campaign, where we put the title, Living with the Technology, Children's Health Remains their Inequitable Right and Our Own Obligation. And we are trying to address the abuse of the technology. We are not against the technology. We are against the abuse and the addiction. And here we had the honor that the Minister of Health himself declared very clearly that all this you are hearing are not hypotheses, but are documented, well-documented effects, and you have to do something. And he declared his support to our activity. This was for the first time done by a Minister of Health. So now we're approaching at the end. This is our leaflet, and our leaflet travel on buses. We stick those posters on buses traveling all over Cyprus in the main cities. So it spreads the message, make people go to the website and learn more about this issue, how to protect your children. And now I'm coming to the end, so I want to share with you some of my thoughts. There is no doubt that potential effects on children are serious, in many cases irreversible, and we don't know yet all the long-term effects. The safety of emerging technology has never been proved. Industry is only claiming compliance with obsolete limits. We have to have in mind that the burden of safety proof should be on the industry. Need to revise limits to demand for safer technologies, at least for children. We must establish EMF-free zones and apply free EMF time and biological criteria to evaluate the situation in the devices. Doctors can influence, advise, and empower parents for safer options. EMF must become part of medical curriculum. It's not the case so far. Physicians and healthcare people should raise the visibility of EMF as a plausible environmental risk factor in clinical evaluations and treatment protocols. And the Ministry of Health and doctors must push for systematic monitoring of the impacts in schools and elsewhere for the children, to see what is the impact so far of this technology. Now coming to our role, as public health scientists, we should not have dilemmas, but moral obligation. Our judgment of the weight of evidence gaps must be complemented always with public health fundamental principles and values for prevention, set already by our ancient Greeks. We must support science-based precautionary principle. How we can do this? By providing politicians and society concrete information which has to be distilled out of our scientific publications, have to be distilled and offered to them in a way they can understand and can evaluate them. We urgently need to develop and implement a real risk governance, combination with the precautionary principle. And this is our role as socially responsible science. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And I would like to thank His Excellency the Mayor and his staff for this invitation, for this warm hospitality, especially Barbara, Sebastian, and all of you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.